For those of you who I haven't met, and there's lots in this room, which is really good because this is really intended to be the beginning. I'm Zoe Krunis. I'm a LIGHTS Facilitator at the LIGHTS program, obviously, with Community Living Toronto. We've also got Heidi Reinders. I almost said Reinders. That's wrong. Heidi works. Heidi is also a LIGHTS Facilitator. And later on, we're going to be having Matt, who's a father, presenting. And his daughter's over here watching an iPad and having a great time. So he's going to be talking about his experiences as a dad, right? All right, so like I said, the intention of this presentation is to really look at it from the very beginning of the process. A lot of new faces, so I'm assuming most of you are kind of new in this process. So I get a sense of the room. Had anyone heard about LIGHTS before they had this flyer for this invite come across their desk? Could I just get a show of hands who had heard of LIGHTS before? Okay, so some yes, some no, all right. How many folks are actively looking for their family member to move out of their family home? Okay. Is there anybody, that's actually made that jump yet and has a family member with a developmental disability living outside in their own home? Still thinking about it? Okay, so all still in the planning stages. Perfect. Okay, so this is the beginning. What I wanted to do was look at the landscape of developmental services. So looking at it from a really broad perspective, some of you might be looking at this saying, you know, Zoe, I already know about all this stuff. And that's amazing. You would be ahead of the curve for the most part. Lots of times there's some education that we're doing because I'm not sure how much education has been out there. So getting a sense of what the landscape is and where LIGHTS fits in with that landscape. So what are developmental services? This is kind of my condensed version of what developmental services are. Broken up into 4 main categories. One thing to keep in mind, these are developmental services as defined by Developmental Services Ontario. These are ministry-funded developmental services. So, main one here, residential. So that includes any residential supports like group home, supported individualized living, life share, those things. Then we've got community participation, day supports, employment training programs, anything again that's ministry funded. Case management, and going along with that, specialized supports. So adult protective services, family support workers, people that can be there to support an individual and help them manage the things that they need to manage and help their family manage as well. And then planning, so person-directed planning, with or without implementation. So this is kind of a simplified version of what services are out there right now through Developmental Services Ontario. What is Developmental Services Ontario? Is everyone familiar with the DSO? Is there anyone who's not familiar? Kind of? A little bit? Okay. All these developmental services that I talked about in the last slide, the first point of contact for those services is DSO. So they came about in 2011, intending to be the agency that funnels all individuals into ministry-funded developmental services. They're supposed to be the #1 contact for these things. They're the holder of the list, the community needs list. So, first point of contact is the DSO. From there, the DSO will fit this person with developmental services, what they're looking for. So that's the pathway. Okay? So you're probably thinking, these services, there's more out there. I know there's more out there. Of course there's more out there. There's these core services, but then there's also fee-for-service. So fee-for-service is linked to these services because quite often, too fast, because quite often these fee-for-service programs are provided by the same agencies that are providing these other supports. So thinking about an art class that's run by Community Living Toronto, that there's a fee to attend. It's run by an agency that's running ministry-funded supports, but individuals are paying for this service. Now, this service could be anything, really. Quite often we think of it as like classes, cooking classes, art classes, Zumba classes. It can also be person-directed planning. It can also be training programs. It could be really anything that people are looking for, and agencies want to be able to offer it. I think this is a really great way to access agency supports without having to wait in the queue with the DSO. So this provides choice to people, but it is a fee for service. So the ministry is not funding these directly. So like a day program where you're paying a day rate, that would be fee for service. But then we get passport funding. So that's where that link to the DSO comes in. And that passport funding can be used to pay for these fee-for-service programs. But passport funding comes from the DSO. What about other things? There's other stuff in there. When I say ministry funded here, I mean the Ministry of Community and Social Services. So they're the ministry that's funding developmental services. Of course, there are other ministries that are involved. There's the City of Toronto, things like Parks and Rec, things like Housing Connections, Toronto Community Housing. That's all run through the municipality, the City of Toronto. That's not linked with the DSO. And then you get stuff that's at Holland Bloorview or CAMH, Center for Addictions and Mental Health. That's all stuff that runs through the Ministry of Health. So if you're thinking there's a lot of different places that services can come from, you're right. Do they all talk to each other? Not necessarily. So when we're looking at what is available in developmental services, we're focusing mainly on the Ministry of Community and Social Services, but then there's also other ministry involvement. Okay, so that's what we have. I meant to change something on here and I didn't. Okay, how do these pieces all fit together in terms of what life looks like for a person who needs developmental services? So, all of these pieces are connected. All of these pieces are funded by the Ministry of Community and Social Services. ODSP, funded by the Ministry of Community and Social Services, but quite different from the DSO. People who can receive Ontario disability supports, that's income or employment training programs. But that doesn't necessarily mean that they're able to access supports through the DSO. The DSO and ODSP offer supports to folks, but they're not necessarily the same folks. They could be. In the cases that people that we're working with, quite often they are. But there's some people who are registered with the DSO who aren't receiving ODSP for whatever reason. Maybe they're the beneficiary of a pension or something like that. So they're not receiving those income supports. Then there's people who are receiving ODSP who aren't eligible for DSO services. So looking at the green blocks are the funding, the money, how this is being paid for. Passport funding So that's that funding that can be used for community participation, and that's given through the DSO. So those two are linked. The DSO and the passport funding are linked, and that's another sort of stream of funding that can be used to support services. And then on top, we've got fee-for-service. So again, we talked about what that could look like. Quite often, those fee-for-service programs are offered by agencies who are offering ministry-funded supports, which would run through the DSO, but many more people can access them without having a waiting list. So that's where those green blocks can come in and help funding those things. Okay. Where does LIGHTS fit into all of this? So we've got this sort of broad landscape of developmental services. Things are complex, complicated. There's weights. There's different places that we have to look at in terms of how can we manage this. What is LIGHTS? Where does LIGHTS fit into all of this? So LIGHTS is not a fee-for-service program, meaning families don't pay a fee to access the LIGHTS network, which is Heidi and myself. But if it's not a fee-for-service program and it's associated with Community Living Toronto, does that mean we have to go through the DSO? No, you don't access LIGHTS through the DSO. So it's not something that you're waiting for with the DSO. You wouldn't be waiting for LIGHTS. In that way, we're kind of a funny program because we're not really fitting into one of these two things here. And there are reasons for that. It's a bit of a different program, so I think it's quite innovative. But that's the next one. LIGHTS is all about planning and facilitation. That's the bones of what we do. Planning and facilitation. Quite often, in our case, we're planning and facilitating a living situation. But planning and facilitation is the main part of that. So that's what LIGHTS is. This is my elevator speech. When people ask me what I do, this is what I tell them. What does that mean? What are you? What exactly do you do? You plan and facilitate. Well, we help facilitate the development of a living situation for people with developmental disabilities who aren't receiving ministry funding for residential supports specifically. So they're not living in a group home or a SIL or life share. To live outside of the family home, so either the home they share with their parents, a sibling, grandparents, foster parents, something like that, by planning, gathering resources from all of these different places within the sector that we come to know that there are resources potentially available, and also by involving their support networks. So quite often that's family. That could mean other people. Who is a part of your family member support network? So that's what this means. That's what we do. Do we have a stock of real estate that we fit people into? No. Do we manage homes that have been created with our facilitation and planning? No. Okay, what is planning? I need to take a drink of water because this is my story I like to tell. How many people are familiar with person-directed planning? Does anyone have a person-directed plan that's been done for their family member? Great, awesome. So we really, our philosophy is very much rooted in person-directed planning. And that person-directed planning is based around a person. When we're planning with people, when families come to us and say, our daughter wants to move out. Okay, so what does that look like? my analogy, and I can't take credit for this actually because someone gave it to me a long time ago, and I haven't seen them since, so I'm just going to claim it as my own. But my analogy is when families ask me, okay, well, we want our daughter to live outside the home. It's not, that's what it is, right? I always say, try and imagine a dragon. Picture a dragon in your head. And what does it look like? Well, it's a dragon, right? What color is it? Does it have a tail? Does it have the stegosaurus spikes? What does it look like? What are the specific details of what this dragon looks like? And do you know what a dragon, do you know all the pieces of it? Or are you still trying to figure out exactly what it looks like? Does it look the same as everybody else in your family? Does it look the same as what your family member wants or sees as their dragon? I know I've had this conversation with Laura before. Laura's dragon's her son's two-headed dragon. My dragon is not. My dragon, when I think about what the dragon is the Shrek dragon, because I like its long eyelashes, and it's got cute little dragon donkey babies. That's my dragon. But it looks quite different for everybody. And what we're trying to do when we're planning and facilitating with families is getting them to imagine, what does a home look like? What does support look like? What does our involvement look like? What does our family member's day look like, week look like, year look like? All of these different things, thinking about it. And that really relates back to what the philosophy is, what the values are, and also, what you've seen, what you know, what your experiences are. That's what we're trying to tease out when we're planning and facilitating. We're trying to get people to think about all these things. And that's really important for many different reasons. Next one. Because planning brings it all together, right? It's kind of like a puzzle. You start with one puzzle piece. Maybe you start with a roommate. And then the next puzzle piece is the home, the apartment. The next piece is the support. The next piece is the family involvement. You're bringing together all these different pieces of the puzzle. And that's what true planning is. And when I say you, I mean you as a family, you as a support network. Our role is as facilitators. It's to help your family and your family member figure out exactly what their home looks like. That's not really our decision. That's up to us to help your family discover. So a piece of that is networking. Quite often people don't want to live on their own. And I think, when families come to us and say, could you help introduce me to people? And I say, sure, but we should probably get to know each other a little bit first, so when I'm trying to think of people you would get along with and like, it would be good if I had a sense of who you were and what your ideas were. Where you want to live, what this looks like, what your involvement looks like, all these different little pieces of it. So when it comes to that, after we're working on the planning, when we get to networking, networking is really about forging partnerships. And that's for an individual and for a family. And partnerships could be partnerships of people that you're living with. They could also be connections. They could be information seeking. They could be being part of that community and sharing resources, because I'm a big believer in that people partnering together, the sum is much greater than its parts. And skills can be very complementary. And that can really be the key to making things work. So when we're looking at partnerships and forming partnerships, we're looking at utilizing networking opportunities, which is what you're all doing here tonight. You're utilizing the opportunities to connect with people who might be like-minded. You're looking at goal setting. What do you want? How does it look? Putting a plan into place after you've come up with the plan. Developing a clear philosophy. So having that idea and having that vision of what this will look like, not just short term, but also, what you could foresee in the future. And communication, being clear, open, all those really important things in forming partnerships. What's the next one? So, LIGHTS is helping families. In summary, dream. First step to a plan is to have a dream. To come up with a plan. To network with other families. And then, one more, to make living situations happen. That's what we do. And all of these pieces are really important. It's okay. So, I'm not going to talk for too long because I think everyone's going to be more interested in hearing about what a parent has to say. And I'm sure there's probably questions, but again, if we could save them to the end, and then Matt and I can address the questions afterwards. I always like to celebrate achievements because I think celebration is really important. So some celebrations that we've had. We've been around for 6 years. Started out with Laura. Laura's still involved. And it's not going anywhere. Over 50 people have moved out into a home with roommates or a home on their own. Hundreds more are planning with us. LIGHTS is advocating the sector, the ministry. LIGHTS is advocating for families and giving people choices about where they live, what they want their lives to look like in community. There are 2 of us now, which is actually a really big win for us, because there are hundreds of people planning, I should say. And families are planning. Families aren't just waiting until something happens and then you're thrown into a situation that isn't what you chose, isn't what you dreamed of, isn't what you planned for. So that's really huge.